Hello, and welcome to the Conference Rewind video series. I am Jamie Vidic, Director of Educational Products and Services at the International Society of Arboriculture. Today, I'm pleased to bring you Expanded Crews and Views by Jessika Mitchell. This presentation was originally given at the 2020 ISA Virtual Conference, and the views are those of the presenter. Now, sit back and enjoy this presentation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessika Mitchell. Thank you so much for joining me today for this discussion about worker recruitment and retention in the tree care industry. Before we begin, I'd like to give you all a bit of context about my background and career thus far. In my mid-20s, I discovered the tree care industry for the first time, and I immediately knew that I had found my calling. I quit my full-time job in accounting. I went freelance so I'd have a flexible schedule, and I enrolled myself in a horticulture program at the local university. I searched for work, but job descriptions all required field experience or ISA certifications. It took me over a year and a half before I was finally hired by a local nonprofit. Now that I'm 6 years into my career, I find myself asking a very different set of questions. I've gained a ton of experience since I joined the workforce back in 2014. I've had participation in industry events like tree climbing competitions, workshops, and trainings, and I've also presented at several conferences throughout the United States. At every one of these events, the same questions come up time and time again. How do I keep my talented employees engaged? And how do I encourage them to stay with my company? Today, I offer you an opportunity to explore these same questions through a different lens. We're living in unprecedented times, and in recent years, there's been a lot of political and social unrest. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and other social movements are challenging us to face difficult topics head on, to look beyond our personal experiences, and to empathize with people from all different walks of life. These conversations are really hard and can be polarizing if people feel ignored or challenged. I realize that some members of our community may feel hesitation about watching a woman present on challenges related to gender. I hope that if you're one of these people, you'll stay tuned in and hear me out, because the content in this presentation is grounded in new research specific to our industry and explores a variety of different perspectives, not just those of women. During this presentation, we'll start off by exploring some challenges that employers face while hiring female employees. I'll also present research demonstrating specific barriers that women may experience when they start their careers in the tree care industry, as well as difficult situations that women may or may not encounter after joining a predominantly male workforce. But the primary focus of this talk is to explore solutions that will benefit all members of the tree care industry, not just one demographic group. Of course, many of these solutions will likely create more opportunities for women in the tree care industry, but they'll also improve work conditions for everybody and address recurring concerns about our ability to recruit talent and minimize turnover costs. Let's get started. One of the most frequently cited challenges that is reported by women at the crew level is access to a restroom on the job site. Realistically, this affects men on the job as well. Let's be real here. There are certain biological functions that impact women and men that should never take place in the back of a chip truck. This is a matter of human dignity as well as professionalism. And as employers, we need to find a better solution to this issue that will benefit all members of our community. The other challenge reported by female employees at the crew level is the difficulty in finding PPE and uniforms that fit their body type. PPE that doesn't fit properly is a safety hazard. Imagine trying to walk up a hill wearing a safety vest that is essentially long enough to be a dress and tied around the hips. This creates a serious trip hazard by restricting movement and affecting balance. In addition to the most obvious and practical challenges, research indicates that there are also more subtle issues at play. Gender socialization and stereotypes can impact hiring decisions or company culture as a whole. Gender norms are so deeply ingrained in our society and in us that they're often less obvious and go overlooked. In a recent paper authored by collaborators at the University of British Columbia, authors cite research that indicates some interesting themes. In the 2018-2019 school year, the Bachelor of Urban Forestry program saw a larger percentage of female college students than males. Studies also show that women make up 48% of the workforce in Canada, but only make up 16% of the forestry industry. In the Greater Toronto Area, that number drops down to somewhere between 0 and 9% of employees. We know that there are educated females with degrees in our field. And we know that 88% of employers in the Greater Toronto Area said that they would be willing to hire more women. Several respondents in a recent survey that was issued by the Western Chapter Women in Arboriculture Committee also echoed these sentiments, but stated that they have trouble finding qualified job candidates. Another respondent in that study indicated that they've hired unqualified applicants in the past, provided them with training and support, but that the employees chose to pursue an alternate career path after a few months on the job. Turnover rates come at a very high cost for all companies, large and small. Recruiting, hiring, and training new employees requires a great deal of time and resources. It's very important that we try to gain a better understanding of why employees choose to leave, so that we can help companies reduce these costs and increase profit margins. But we need additional research in this area to better understand how turnover rates impact women and other minority groups. Now let's shift our focus and look at some challenges that face female employees in a traditionally male-dominated industry. Over the past 2 years or so, I've made a conscious effort to start attending industry events that were designed specifically for women by women. In the past, I've avoided these types of activities because I've always felt that excluding men from these important conversations is not the right strategy. I started showing up out of curiosity, and if I'm honest, I've left feeling a bit confused. On the one hand, I feel inspired by and grateful for past generations of women that forged ahead against difficult odds, because they created opportunities for me to make my way into the industry. But on the other hand, I feel frustrated. At times, it seems like other women believe that we've achieved success just because we're now represented in greater numbers. Personally, I find that I'm frequently still the only woman in the room. And unfortunately, I've personally experienced both gender discrimination and sexual harassment throughout my career in the industry. It's often very subtle, and sometimes I don't even notice that it's happening. But there have definitely been moments where I find myself thinking, did that seriously just happen? It turns out I'm not alone. After hearing stories shared by other women in the industry, I decided to do some research of my own, with the hopes of quantifying these anecdotal accounts. I brought this idea to the Western Chapter's Women in Arboriculture Committee, and we decided to conduct a survey. In August of 2020, the survey was released and sent out to approximately 4,000 members of the tree care industry. We were hoping to hear back from men and women so we could see a variety of perspectives. We also hope to hear from crew members, from supervisors, managers, educators, researchers, as many people as we could get that would represent a realistic demographic of the industry. What are their opinions about the tree care industry as a whole? What are their experiences, their concerns, their needs? Are there any specific resources or opportunities that they're seeking? And how can our committee help provide support moving forward? The survey was completely anonymous, and it contained 66 questions that were spread across 10 different topics. Some topics include sensitive and personal information that are related to gender discrimination or harassment in the industry. The structure of the survey was set up to help us gain a better understanding of where these incidents usually take place. At work, at industry events, both. This is a key detail because location determines what type of support is needed and how we prioritize our efforts. Please note that these are just preliminary findings. The survey is still underway, and we would love for you and your colleagues to participate. The QR code and link will be included in the final slides, along with additional information for your reference. Upon completion of the survey, the Women in Arboriculture Committee will be outsourcing data processing to a third party with expertise in this type of analysis. The raw data will be kept confidential, but overall trends and findings will be shared with the tree care industry through publications and future presentations. In the first section of the survey, we focused on demographic information. So who are our respondents and what job roles do they fill? Currently, the top 3 reported are consultants, which come in at 48%, supervisors and managers, which come in at 38%, and owners and presidents, which come in at 25%. This implies that a large percentage of our respondents right now either own their own businesses or are in a leadership role. In a follow-up question, we determined that 60% of respondents indicated that they are currently involved in making hiring decisions for their companies. 76% of respondents identified as white or Caucasian. 65% identified as male, and 32% identified as female. Less than 4% selected one out of the remaining 3 options. We also discovered that most of our respondents at the moment are highly educated. At first glance, it appears that the crew level is underrepresented. Higher percentage of consultants, supervisors, managers, and business owners, 60% in charge of making hiring decisions. It's also important to remember that 73% of our respondents have achieved a college degree. 76% of our respondents are white, and 32% of our respondents are female. Do these numbers match up with the employees that we see at the crew level? It's also important to keep in mind that of the respondents, 92% reported that they work within the Western chapter. 77% of those work in the state of California. We also received respondents that reported work in different states throughout the United States. That was 7% of our respondent pool. And we also had 1% of international respondents. In the next section of the survey, we asked questions that were pertaining to overall job satisfaction. Respondents were provided with a series of statements, and they were asked to rank those statements on a scale from very much agree or very much disagree to very much agree. We hoped to gain a sense of overall morale, if respondents felt like their work has purpose and meaning. And we also hoped to examine trends between job satisfaction and experience in the industry. It's important to remember who our respondent pool is at the moment, right? Because 77 to 87% of them selected either somewhat agree or very much agree for every single statement. So these results are overwhelmingly positive at the moment. Will we see this trend continue as we collect more data from different audience? What happens when we get more participation of respondents that are performing work at the crew level outside the state of California or outside of the United States? The next set of questions in our survey relate to gender in the workplace and at industry events. Before we continue looking at survey results, I'd like to take a couple of moments to consider this question, because the terms sex and gender are often used interchangeably. However, they have very distinct meanings. In chapter 1 of her book, Paradoxes of Gender, sociologist Judith Lorber states that sex is determined by physiological and procreative differences between individuals. Sex is based on our anatomy and reproductive organs. Gender, on the other hand, is a social construction or a set of learned behaviors. These behaviors become automatic at a very early age. They're deeply ingrained in our daily actions and interactions with other people. Lorber argues that in almost every encounter, human beings produce gender by behaving in ways that they learned were appropriate for their gender status, or resisting or rebelling against those norms. So how does the socialization of gender impact the tree care industry, which has been traditionally a male-dominated field? In a recent article that was published in Western Arborist magazine, Allegra Mountner points out that men in the tree care industry are also subject to gender norms. There are male stereotypes that are often or sometimes associated with a specific set of behaviors, which are used to acquire and retain power. Examples of these behaviors include the denial of weakness or vulnerability, the appearance of being strong and robust, the dismissal of any need for help, a ceaseless interest in sex, and the display of aggressive behavior and physical dominance. Do any of these behaviors sound familiar to you? Have you seen them on your job sites? Workplaces that are centered around these hyper-masculine stereotypes can be exclusive and may be a deterrent for women that are just starting out their careers in the tree care industry. Let's take a second to revisit the breakdown by gender identity for our current respondent pool. Right now, the sample size is too small for 3 out of 5 of these classifications, so we can't really draw any meaningful conclusions until we collect more information. There's less than 1% that identify as non-binary or third gender, 1% that prefer to self-describe, and 2% that prefer not to say. The sample size is much larger for male respondents at 65% and for female respondents at 32%. For this reason, the remainder of the presentation will focus on these 2 classifications. The remaining questions in the survey pertain to respondents' perceptions of and experiences in the tree care industry. 56% do not think that gender discrimination and/or harassment is common. However, 43% of respondents do think that these instances are frequent or common. That's 2 out of 5 respondents that answered this question. It's a very substantial number. But will we see a trend here based on the respondent's gender identity? In other words, is one gender more likely than another gender to believe that discriminatory behaviors or harassment are common in the tree care industry? Of male respondents, 67% selected no and 33% selected yes. The distribution among female respondents is quite different. 32% selected no and 68% selected yes. Because these responses are so disparate between genders, we can assume that females are more likely than males to believe that discriminatory behaviors and/or harassment are common occurrences. If this opinion were not impacted by gender, we would expect to see a similar distribution base when compared to the total number of respondents, in which 56% answered no and 43% answered yes. Even though this preliminary data indicates that this opinion is influenced by gender, it is very important to note that 1/3 of women do not share this belief. Furthermore, 1/3 of male respondents do acknowledge that discrimination and/or harassment based on gender is a common occurrence in the industry. Respondents were asked to choose between 4 options. Respondents that said yes, they do agree. They chose work, industry events, both, or other. To make this data easier to visualize, the 65 respondents that selected both have been added to the work and industry event categories. And that's where these totals come from. So what does this tell us? If you're a supervisor or a manager, you're in a unique position. If the majority of these instances are happening at our workplaces, then we have the ability to take action and remedy this situation. The next question, we asked respondents if they've personally experienced gender discrimination or harassment in the tree care industry. 74% answered no, and 26% answered yes. That's still 1/4 of the respondent pool. The trend that we saw earlier continues. So of male respondents, we see that the majority of them selected no. They've never experienced gender discrimination or harassment in the industry, versus 9%. The distribution among female respondents is quite different. We see that 45% have indicated they've never experienced this, compared with 55% that have. The following question, we asked if respondents have witnessed any of these behaviors. We see a slight increase from the experienced question, right? Now we've got 37% that have answered yes. When we compare this by gender identity, we see a similar trend, that there are more female respondents that have witnessed gender discrimination than male respondents. The other thing that's interesting about this slide, if we compare it to the experience, we can see that there's actually a 20% increase among men. So we went from 9% of respondents, of male respondents, that indicated that they have experienced these behaviors firsthand, and now we increased to 29%. There's also a slight decrease in the female respondents. We went from 55%, and that has now been reduced to 50%. So in the final question, or the second to last question of our survey, we offered a statement and allowed the respondents to choose many options from the list, or from the pick list. We can tell by looking at this data that most of our respondents already engage in these types of discussions. But there is a general sense that people need more information. They worry that they don't know what to say, or they worry that they might say the wrong thing. Some respondents also are afraid that they won't be taken seriously by other members of their community. So this slide will help give us a sense of what types of resources we can provide in the future, moving forward, to address some of these issues. We asked an open-ended question at the very end of the survey, and we got a really, really amazing set of responses from the respondent pool. Let's take a look at some of the female perspectives that came out of this. Women have to work twice as hard as men to get the same amount of credit and to prove that they can do the job. It has gotten better. I think age and gender harassment combined is even more harmful. I see young women get discouraged and leave the industry. I want to stand out for my excellence and expertise, not for standing out by being a female in a male-dominated industry. Most of the time, the person engaging in disrespectful gender discrimination behavior doesn't even realize what they're doing. Perhaps there is just a general lack of awareness amongst members of our industry and society at large about these issues. It's also important to note that many female respondents stated that they've always been treated with respect and that they feel valued and supported by the tree care industry. Now let's take a look at a few male perspectives. Some male respondents did not see value in the survey. In this case, the respondent indicates that advocating for increased wages for tree workers would be a more productive use of time. This respondent also indicates that he did not see value in the survey. He disagrees with the idea that gender bias is a real barrier for women entering the workforce. Other male respondents did see value in the survey. This man indicated that it inspired him to be more self-aware and more thoughtful about these issues. Another suggested that they have not seen a venue or an avenue in which to pursue gender equity until now. Some men highlight their belief that a boys' club mentality still exists and is perpetuated by a culture of exclusion within the tree care industry. Perhaps there's a need to build a culture of respect so that minority groups can feel safe within our industry. The original goals of this survey were to focus on issues that were related specifically to gender, because as the Women in Arboriculture Committee, we felt a need to stay within the scope of our mission statement. A really interesting trend that we've discovered is that we got a lot of feedback from respondents suggesting that gender is not the most important area of focus right now. Some believe that ISA and chapter organizations should avoid dealing with issues of this nature altogether. Others believe that racism needs to be addressed. Others called for more resources and training materials in Spanish and other languages, and in-person, hands-on trainings that are reasonably priced and accessible to all socioeconomic groups. People clearly have a lot of opinions about all kinds of issues in the tree care industry or resources that they feel they need. And they need a venue in which they can express these needs. We need to create a safe space where people are allowed to voice their concerns or frustrations without fear of losing their jobs and without fear of negative impacts to their reputation. This conversation needs to continue, and additional research is required to make sure that the data that we're collecting accurately represents the tree care industry as a whole. But at the end of the day, many of the challenges that we've already identified can be resolved with solutions that will have a positive impact on all of our members of the workforce. Okay, so let's talk some solutions now. The first step in identifying solutions for any problem is to understand the challenges that need to be addressed. Capture additional data about your workforce through voluntary self-identification surveys. Feel free to reach out if you would like to take a look at the WIA survey that we issued. I would be happy to send you the spec with the questions and the responses, which you can use if you see fit. Ask employees about their experiences. Find out if they have a sense of safety and trust with the companies that they work for. Consider using an anonymous platform if you believe that that will be a challenge that you need to overcome. You can also hire a third-party organization to handle this for you. Next, we want to analyze the data. Ask yourself questions like, how diverse is my workforce? What demographic information is important to you? Do you care about gender identity specifically? Do you care about race and ethnicity? What about age, family status, sexual orientation, language preferences? If you've collected information about job satisfaction or desired resources and training, you may be able to identify themes among these demographic groups. Research indicates that different demographic groups will likely experience different barriers that will require unique solutions. Finally, you want to consider your needs and primary concerns. Is turnover a challenge that you're currently facing? How long do employees stay with your company? Trends related to length of service by gender, race, and ethnicity may exist. What's the length of service among minority groups that you have or that have worked on your team thus far? What is the length of service among white men that have worked? Goodness, I'm going to start that over. Is turnover a challenge that you are currently facing? How long do employees stay with your company? Trends related to the length of service by gender identity, race, and ethnicity are all important. What's the length of service among minority groups that have worked on your team thus far? What's the length of service among white men that have worked on your team thus far? Is there a difference? Do minority groups have a higher retention rate than their white male counterparts? If this holds true for your company, then you now have a specific business case for diversifying your workforce because higher retention rates are directly correlated with reduced costs associated with turnover. If this does not hold true for your company, you might want to ask yourself a simple follow-up question. Why are minority groups leaving? Do we have good workplace culture that's inclusive? Maybe not. At the ISA conference in Knoxville last year, I saw Will Nutter, president and COO of Right Tree Service, give a talk about employee retention. In his presentation, he suggested that there's a link between good company culture and higher retention rates. This concept stuck with me, and I found myself thinking about it a lot after I'd returned home. I'm lucky enough to know what good culture looks and feels like, but how is it built? Many companies have stated mission or vision statements. Some may also have identified and named their core values. If so, I recommend that you revisit those and consider how they frame the culture of your company. Hopefully, during the assessment phase, you've been able to gather information from your employees about their perspectives and experience. Are the company's stated values in alignment with existing workplace practices? Is there any room for clarification or improvement? Does the company put its money where its mouth is? Building culture is centered around the practice of putting intentions into action. Management style plays a critical role in terms of building company culture and ensuring the success of employees. Don Clifton and a team of scientists from Gallup have been performing research on employee engagement for decades. Findings suggest that there's a direct correlation between management style and how positive and productive employees are at work. The chances of an employee being actively disengaged is directly linked to their management style, to their manager's leadership style. If a manager primarily ignores their employees, the chances that those employees will be actively disengaged is 40%. If the manager focuses on weaknesses, chances of active engagement drop down to 22%. If the management team focuses on strengths, the chances of active disengagement drop to 1%. The bottom line is that managers and the way they choose to lead can have significant impacts on how positive and productive their employees will be. So how can we start boosting employee engagement? It's important to make a distinction when you're coaching your employees between talent and effort. When we're providing feedback, both praise and constructive criticism, we need to reframe our approach. Does this statement emphasize the importance of talent or effort? It praises innate natural abilities of the climber. What about this statement? In this case, the praise focuses on the employee's effort and their drive to learn new techniques and succeed. When we focus on praising effort over ability, we're actively demonstrating that we value and appreciate our crew members. At the end of the day, most people gain a great deal of satisfaction when they feel acknowledged, valued, and appreciated. The outcome of sending that message to our colleagues will ultimately frame how they receive the rest of the conversation and how the relationship between a manager and a supervisor or between colleagues develops over time. How do we go about instilling confidence in our employees or our colleagues? In their book, The Confidence Code, by journalists Katty Kay and Claire Shipman, they suggest a three-part approach that includes graduated exposure to risk, teaching your team members how to fail, how to take calculated risks, understanding that they may fail. You're giving them a risk, or you're giving them the opportunity to take small risks, and you're there to support them when they need guidance or support. When they succeed, take the time to celebrate those successes and to reflect on what worked. When they fail, we want to emphasize their effort and their action. What did they do well? And let's reflect on the lessons that we learned from the failure and how we can do it better next time. Emphasize the actions that we're going to take when we experience these situations in the future, if they arise. In the opening pages of his book, The Culture Code, author Dan Coyle argues that some teams are more likely to succeed than others. Why is this the case? Coyle cites an experiment performed by the designer and engineer Peter Skillman. Build the tallest possible structure using the materials listed here. The structure must be freestanding. Teams that participated in this experiment were made up of engineers, business school students, and kindergartners. Who do you think had the highest overall scores? The kindergartners did. Why? Because they just act. They're not afraid of trying and failing and trying and failing. The transition is seamless. They don't sit around talking about it. They don't waste their time seeking power or to impress or improve their status within the group. They're flexible in their approach. They're responsive to new data as it pours in. They adapt and make informed decisions based on the feedback that they're gaining during this experiment. They just do it. That's confidence in action. Failure is a critical component of success for both individuals and organizations. Failure without fear builds creativity and innovation, plasticity, resilience, responsiveness. All of these traits are key components of any successful business model. Think about how a tech company would approach a prototype. They want to get it out into the world as fast as they can, test it, see what works and what doesn't, and build a new prototype until they have a successful product that they can bring to the market. Today, I've talked a lot about organizational changes that we can make, but I'd also like to suggest that there are personal practices that we can utilize within the workplace. Step outside your comfort zone. I love climbing because ultimately it's the best way to step outside my comfort zone and to test my limits. But it also allows me to bring my body and my mind into alignment. I feel centered and completely focused on the task at hand. Normal thought processes of what ifs and could I have and I shouldn't have all disappear. When you fail, don't beat yourself up about it. Let's think back to our strategies for developing confidence in previous sections and adopting a growth mindset. Instead of focusing on failure in a negative light, reflect on what you've learned. Identify opportunities for improvement or growth. Give yourself a pat on the back for what you have achieved. Limb walking is still really difficult for me. Sometimes it feels completely intuitive and natural. Sometimes it feels impossible. And every time I give up, I beat myself up. These are not productive thoughts. I encourage you all to start paying attention to your thought processes and observe your gut reactions. In this alternate example, I've done 3 things. I've acknowledged my failure, I've emphasized my effort, and I've set a goal for the future that is realistic and attainable. I've set myself up for success by giving myself permission to take one small step at a time. This process is powerful and can help rewire neurological pathways in the brain, but it does require awareness and effort. You have to make a conscious shift from a negative to a positive or even neutral perspective. This is a lot easier for our employees to do when their managers are leading by example. Lastly, I'd like to discuss some recruiting practices, the importance of looking beyond the usual hiring pools and considering more diverse applicants. It's really important to note that recruiting needs to be aligned with the organization's current culture and values. If you haven't completed the assessment phase and addressed pre-existing challenges that are related to workplace culture, then your efforts to diversify your workforce may be unsuccessful. Ultimately, your organization may not be as competitive in a diverse labor market. There are realities that some companies will inevitably face that make diversification and inclusion initiatives very difficult to implement. Know that and plan accordingly. There are plenty of resources available online regarding change management to help you navigate these difficult situations. Compare the demographics of your workforce with the labor market. Who is underrepresented on your team? The law of marketing dictates that we do what has previously worked for us in the past. So if we want to attract different talent, we need to make changes in our hiring practices that effectively break the law of marketing. Think carefully about which requirements are actually necessary for the role that you are trying to fill. What level of education, what level of experience, what certifications and qualifications or skills are truly, truly necessary, and what can you teach? Use neutral language in your job descriptions. Avoid using words that may resonate with one demographic group more than another. Consider potential language barriers. Consider advertising strategies that will reach potential job candidates that don't have a computer or access to internet at home. Compare wages of similar industries. Are your wages competitive? Think about if you currently offer benefits and company policies that support the diverse talent that you hope to attract. You may not be able to compete with other companies if you provide health insurance that doesn't accommodate same-sex couples. Consider adopting family-friendly practices. Do you offer paid parental leave for both parents? Can you afford to offer extended paid leave? What about flexible schedules? Many of us are working from home these days, but that's also an option when we're not dealing with a pandemic. What other options can you think of that will help promote work-life balance for your employees? You also want to provide training opportunities for your employees. That hands down is one of the things we've heard time and time again through our survey. ISA and local chapters all offer various workshops and climbing competitions that are based on educational experiences and safety practices. Those events also offer employees the opportunity to learn about cutting-edge technology and climbing techniques. Consider covering your employees' professional development expenses, so paying for their membership dues for ISA or other chapters, certification fees, conference fees, and events. You may also want to assess if you have any policies that are currently exclusive, like employee referral programs. These can be a great way to source staff, but they also present challenges because you're recruiting like-minded individuals. If you can, adopt a sponsorship model. If you're having a difficult time finding qualified job applicants, you may need to invest in them and train them. So make sure that you have the ability to provide those new employees with the training and with the resources that they need to be successful in this industry. I hope that you've found some value in this talk today. For me, the biggest thing that stands out is how different we all are. Every member of our community is unique and has a variety of knowledge, skills, and experiences in the industry. No one perspective is right or wrong. If we can create a culture of respect that is more open to empathizing with others rather than dismissing them, we may be able to address some of the issues or challenges that we as an industry face with attracting new talent. What can you do now? Please consider participating in the Western Chapter Women in Arboriculture Committee. You do not have to be a woman. It is open to all genders. And you do not have to be a member of Western Chapter. We want to expand our respondent pool so that it's more representative of the industry as a whole. Please make sure that your voice is heard. Share this with other members of your community. And if you're a supervisor or a business owner, distribute this link to your employees so that they can participate and allow them to do it on the clock. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to provide you with any of the resources that were used in this presentation or with the resources that we developed in relation to this survey. Again, when the survey is closed, the data will be analyzed by a third-party individual or company, and those findings will be reported back to the community. We're hoping that this will help us identify opportunities to plan workshops and events that will meet the needs and demand of our industry members. I could not have done this alone. I had a whole network of people supporting me, and I'm very grateful to both all of the Women in Arboriculture Committee members of the Western Chapter and to the Western Chapter staff, particularly Rita Franco and Rose Epperson. They allowed us to use their survey platform, and Rita spent a great deal of time putting all of the questions together and assembling the survey. We could not have done this without their support. I also want to thank Sarah Tony Photography for the use of the photographs that she took of past Women in Arboriculture women's climbing workshops. And of course, all of my colleagues at Davie Resource Group who supported me in this effort. Thank you so much, and I hope to hear from you soon.